So there is a rising concern, which Robinson has tapped into, and some would say, his critics would say, he's fueled it for his own devices, but he's tapped into a genuine concern. And the worrying thing for the government should be that as their popularity plunges, the popularity of people like Robinson and like the Reform Party under Nigel Farage, although those two don't get on, you're seeing a rising sentiment in the UK that we're losing our identity as a country. And what should we do about that? Whilst preserving the UK's historic position of being a welcoming, tolerant country, proudly multicultural. How do you juggle that with the sheer volume of people coming in and the impact that's having on local communities? And how do you stop communities developing within communities? In other words, how do you stop the fragmentation of our society where you have little separate worlds developing in all major cities and towns? These are genuine concerns. And for people, the old days, these used to be shut down, these conversations, by people saying, well, you're racist. We're long past that stage. People now openly talk about this in UK on political shows and so on. And you're no longer just labelled a racist if you express concern about immigration. Everybody feels that this is getting unsustainable. So the question is, what do we do about it?
So you have how many kids? You have four kids? Okay.
Yeah.
So 4 kids, but they're grown, right? They're grown. They're doing
32 down to 13.
Okay. So you do have a 13-year-old.
13-year-old, yeah.
Okay. And then what's the oldest after 13?
32.
Okay.
Oh, well, my youngest boy is 24, then 28,
24,
and 32.
so 13. If you were to start all over again, okay, and you're 25 today, and you're capable, meaning you shine on camera, you're very comfortable being under the fire, that's your comfort zone, you're going to go make money no matter where you go, here, any other country. Would you choose to raise your 4 kids where you're at, or would you move out of the country?
I would, and I would remind people we've been through a lot more difficult times than this. I think a lot gets amplified by social media, and that can be a very good thing or a very bad thing. My grandmother was 19 at the start of World War II, and she was 25 when it ended. As she always said to me, I lost 6 of the best years of my life. She said, however, I then went from 25 to 94 and had a brilliant 70 years after that. So imagine living through World War II. Imagine the kind of conversations you and I would have been having about that, about the impending threat of Nazi domination, of Nazis taking over the UK. We've faced bigger challenges than this. This is a challenge that's come, in my opinion, across the whole of Europe. The sweeping migration, much of it coming from countries that have been at war, whether it's Syria, Iraq, or wherever it may be. But you've had millions and millions and millions of people deposed from their homes or fleeing war-torn situations and sweeping across the continent of Europe and wanting a better life for their families, which I completely understand. But it has got unsustainable. And it's not just a problem for the UK, it's a problem for Germany, for France, for many of the European countries. They're all facing the same challenges. Nobody at the moment, it seems to me, has a clear idea of what we do about this, other than I look at somewhere like the United States. I look at the way Donald Trump just slammed the brakes on the southern border almost instantaneously and reduce the number of people coming in from 2.5 million a year to literally a couple of thousand a month, right? And you look at that and you think, well, okay, you can control borders. You just have to have the determination to do it. I also think Trump has universal support in America when he says that anyone who's here illegally in the United States who then commits a crime outside of their immigration status should be deported. Where the flashpoint comes, and where it's an interesting thing as to whether other countries like the UK follow the Trump philosophy on this, is where you start deporting people who have been here for a number of years illegally, but who have been maybe working, paying taxes, contributing to society, bringing up kids and so on. What do you do with those people? I understand that they want to create an atmosphere of you have to come in illegally, and if you don't, then you can't stay here. I understand that, but you don't want America to lose its inherent sense of compassion and empathy either. And I think some of the images for me of ICE running into Home Depot and grabbing people who are undocumented and wanting to throw them out, living in LA as I do a lot of the time, the fear that's engendered amongst the community in LA is it's not a good thing. So I think there's a balance to be struck here, albeit you cannot look at Trump's overall immigration policy and not think it's been extremely effective so far. And you've got to look at the hypocrisy of the left when they go after Trump. It's like my favorite question for my lefty friends, my liberal woke friends. And I used to identify happily as liberal. I just find nothing in common with these people. But I say to them, how many people did Barack Obama deport in 8 years as president? They never know, for one. They can tell exactly how many Trump has, but they never know how many Obama did. And then I tell them it's 3 million people. Just Google it. You can Google it. So A, they don't want to know. B, when they find out, they're completely shocked. C, I said he was known as deporter-in-chief in Mexico. Right? That was his nickname.
That's right.
Right? This guy deported more people pro rata per year than any president in the history of the United States. And yet the same rules do not apply to Obama than do to people like Trump. So, I think there's a lot to learn from the way Trump's gone about it, albeit with some caveats.
Yeah. So you said something about your grandma being 19 to 25 during the war. I lost 6 of my best years, but I lived to 94, 70 years, some of the greatest years of my life, right? Okay. When you had to overcome that war, you had this one guy named Winston Churchill, right? So just curious. You're saying, Muslims that come in and they assimilate, great, no problem. I don't have any problem. We have Muslims in our company that we work with, and they've assimilated. They love America, right? If you ask the Muslim Council of Britain, it'll say that 75% of Muslims in Britain have assimilated and see themselves as Brits.
Yeah.
I'm a Brit. I consider myself proud Brit as well, but 25% don't, depending on the numbers you look at. How would Winston Churchill today, would Winston Churchill be tolerant with the borders? Would he be like, yeah, it's okay, let him come in?
No,
would he handle the threat? And think about how his wiring was. This is your world.
Yeah.
What do you think he would have done today?
No, I think he'd have been tough. I think he'd have been
In what way?
Well, I think he'd have been very protective of our borders in a way that was very protective against the threat of Nazism to our way of life. I think that he would have understood inherently, that actually having open borders, as Ronald Reagan said, right? The best line ever was the simplest one. If you have an open border, you don't have a country. Of course you don't. The very definition of a country is something that has a border. So the moment you allow your border to be completely open, you're just going to be a hostage to your own misfortune. And that's what we're seeing happening. Again, it's a big problem for the continent of Europe. It's not just a problem for the UK. The difference we have is twofold. One, we're an island, the United Kingdom. And secondly, we're detached from the European Union, not just geographically, but financially and every other way now through leaving the EU, through Brexit. So, we haven't got a lot of friends in France, for example. They don't really that bothered about helping us with the small boats crisis, because why should they help us at all, given the pain we inflicted on them by leaving the EU? So there's a lot of that going on. But they've all got their own problems. I was in Paris recently, and you could say, I think you'd be fair to say, Paris is a very different place when you walk around to what it was like 30 years ago. I know. My wife is half Parisian, was born and raised there. And so you see it changing. Now, I've got no problem. America's the classic example of a country where every city you go to, you'll meet myriad people from myriad different countries, myriad different backgrounds, and so on. And the United States is a great example of how this can work. But you have to have control of your borders, and you have to have a sensible, tough immigration policy. The irony for me is, when you try and become like I have, I'm a exceptional alien is my status on my visa status for the United States. I always laugh. They literally call you aliens. And my visa is pegged to my work, and I'm here as an... So, I'm a little bit perturbed that I have to be called an alien, but the fact they call me an exceptional alien, I'll take it.
Respect.
Yeah, but the amount of paperwork and money you have to spend on getting through your visa immigration status each time I have to renew it is indicative of a country that does apply these rules. And the reason that people get so angry about those who circumnavigate the rules is a lot of them have had to do the same. And if you go through the proper process to go into a country legally or to set up your home there with your family, whatever it may be, obviously you're going to really resent people who wash up on a small boat, who might be criminals. You've no idea, because the UK government has no idea, by the way, who's on these boats, for example. We found in one purge that 30% 1 year all came from Albania, which is not a war-torn country. It's a country in Eastern Europe, but there's a lot of gangs. And these were gang members coming into the UK, predominantly the major cities, to deal in things like drugs. So they did a deal with the Albanians, and it stopped that stone dead. But now we have people coming in from other countries. So, there's
What would Churchill have done? What do you think he would have done?
I think what would he have done?
Seriously, what do you think he would have done? Just think his profile.
I certainly think right now he would have put the clamps down on more people coming
would
in.
He have
except
sent,
in exceptional circumstances.
Would he have sent anybody back from the 7% that came here? How would he have treated some of the criminals? How would he have treated some of the some of the stuff that's going on?
So I would say he certainly wouldn't have just picked out the Muslim community. We have a lot of different communities. Like I said, the grooming gang scandal in America was very high profile and attracted a lot of heat, obviously. But we have a lot of different religions, nationalities living in the UK. I don't think he would have singled out Muslims. I think what he would have taken a more pragmatic view and gone, we have too many people in this country now. There's too much pressure on our public services. Some people are going to have to leave. Who are those people? Well, anyone who commits a crime, who's come in here to this country legally but commits a crime, should be deported. I think most people feel that. And then you've got to stop the people coming in illegally. What is the most effective way of doing that? No one's had a good plan so far. The Conservative Party boasts about their Rwanda plan, but it was so ridiculous. It was like a tiny handful of people would have ever got on those planes to Rwanda. It was never going to work in the way they kept trying to promise it would. So what is the most effective way to do it? I actually think that if Trump was in charge, for example, he'd probably say to Emmanuel Macron, if you don't stop these boats leaving your shores, because it has to be done at the French end, then we're going to tariff you 1,000% on your wine and cheese coming into the UK. He would have taken a brutal move like
that.
Why
are they not doing that right now?
I don't know. I don't know why they're not so tougher on the French. You've got to do a deal with the French on this. You've got to say, look, sorry, you're letting all these people get on these boats. Once they're at sea, there's hardly any way to stop them. And then once they wash up on our shore, they are legally allowed to remain as potential asylum seekers.
Is it fear? Is it something you guys need from them? Is it something? Is it a history of
Do you know what it is, Patrick? It's tough leadership. Churchill was a very flawed character in many ways. He was a big smoker, big drinker. He said some pretty ugly things over the years about people, all of these things. But he was also brilliantly talented, an amazing writer, a painter, a musician, also an incredibly complex, talented, brilliant man. But when it came to our biggest ever challenge of facing the threat of Nazism, he was the one who stood up and convinced the British public we can beat these people when nobody else thought we could. And for that alone, he's my greatest ever Briton, albeit like all my great Britons and all my great favourite people, flawed, right? But I think we need a strong, probably flawed character to come forward and go, right, we have this problem. What are we going to do about it? Let's have a proper open debate where people who contribute are not immediately branded racist if they think we have too many people in the country and too many people coming in both legally and illegally. What are we going to do about this?